Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something I think a lot of people have experience with, whether directly or indirectly, and that is alcoholism.
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring the challenges of recovery.
Yeah.
And that pretty heavy idea that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
And to really get into it, we're diving deep into Chapter 3 of the book Alcoholics Anonymous,
Okay.
which is titled More About Alcoholism.
You're right. So we're really going to get into kind of the raw experiences and insights shared by those who have walked this path.
So before we jump in, I want to ask, have you ever wondered what goes on in the mind of someone battling this? Especially when they're trying so hard to stay sober, but their brain seems to be working against them.
Right.
Well, this chapter kind of digs into that struggle.
It really does. And one of the first things it tackles is this almost universal misconception that someone with alcohol addiction can eventually, with enough willpower, regain control over their drinking.
It's like saying, okay, this time I'll just have one or two. I can totally handle it now.
Right.
But the book uses a powerful analogy to show why that kind of thinking just doesn't hold up.
Yeah. The analogy of a person who has lost their legs. The book argues that just like someone can't simply will themselves to grow new legs,
Right.
a true alcoholic can't just regain the ability to control their drinking.
Wow. That's a really stark way to put it. What's fascinating to me is how that analogy connects to what we now know about addiction as a brain disease. You know,
Right?
those physiological changes in the brain, they're real, and they don't just magically reverse themselves.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. It really highlights that fact that this isn't just a matter of willpower. There are actual physical changes happening in the brain that make it incredibly difficult to just stop.
So knowing this, it makes sense that people struggling with alcoholism try all sorts of ways to control their drinking.
Oh, absolutely.
It's almost like a desperate attempt to find a workaround.
Totally, yeah. The book mentions a whole list of them.
Okay.
Things like switching to beer, setting limits on the number of drinks, only drinking in certain social situations, avoiding morning drinks. It's almost like they're trying to negotiate with the addiction.
Right.
Find some loophole in the rules.
But isn't that kind of self-deception something we all grapple with to some extent?
Yeah.
I mean, we've all tried to make deals with ourselves, set those rules to manage our own, bad habits. Where do you think the line is between normal self-regulation and what the book describes as the insanity of alcoholic thinking?
That's such a great question. And it's something the book grapples with, too.
Okay.
It acknowledges that trying controlled drinking can be a form of self-diagnosis, but it stresses that it should never be attempted without professional guidance.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a reminder that this isn't something to experiment with alone.
Right.
But going back to these attempts at control, the book uses a case study to illustrate how this often plays out.
Yes, the story of Jim.
Okay.
A successful businessman who seemed to have it all, but struggled with alcoholism.
Yeah.
What makes his story so compelling is that he relapses despite understanding the nature of his condition.
That's the part that always gets me.
Yeah.
The fact that he knew it was a problem, yet still couldn't resist.
Yeah.
Tell me more about his relapse. Wasn't it triggered by something seemingly harmless?
It started with a whiskey mixed with milk.
Okay.
Sounds almost innocent, right?
Right. It doesn't sound like the typical, hard drinking relapse scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what the book refers to as the insanity of alcoholism. That illogical reasoning that leads to the first drink, even when everything is at stake.
It's like the logical part of his brain knew the risks, but something else, something more powerful took over.
Right.
It makes you wonder about the nature of compulsion.
Yeah.
The disconnect between knowing something is bad for you and still being drawn to it is something we see in so many areas of life, not just addiction.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about procrastination or unhealthy relationships, or even something as simple as overeating. We often know what's best for us, but acting on that knowledge can be incredibly challenging.
It really can.
Absolutely. So how does the book explain this disconnect?
Yeah.
How do they bridge that gap between knowledge and action?
They use a really interesting analogy.
Okay.
Comparing an alcoholic to someone with a dangerous compulsion for jaywalking.
Okay, I'm curious. How does that work?
Well, both the alcoholic and the jaywalker know the risks, right? They're aware of the potential consequences.
Right.
But there's this disconnect between that knowledge and their behavior.
Yeah.
They're both drawn to the risky behavior despite the danger.
That's a really clever way to put it.
Yeah.
It makes it more relatable somehow, takes it out of the realm of moral failing, and places it in the context of like a struggle with impulse control. It also makes you wonder what's happening in the brain during those moments. Like what systems are overriding the logical decision-making parts?
I think that's a great question, and one that neuroscientists are still trying to fully unravel. But the book goes even further, offering another case study to illustrate the complexities of this struggle.
Oh, right. The story of Fred the accountant, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
What stood out to you about his story?
Well, what struck me about Fred's story was how much he believed in his own willpower.
Yeah.
He was convinced that his self-knowledge and discipline were enough to keep him sober. But as we learn, that wasn't the case.
It's almost like he was overconfident, relying too heavily on like his intellect.
Right.
And his past successes. And what's even more interesting is that his relapse wasn't triggered by any like obvious external factors.
Right.
You know, it's not like he was under immense stress or facing some major crisis.
Exactly. He seemed to have everything under control, yet he still relapsed. It really challenges that idea that addiction is simply a response to external circumstances.
It suggests that there's something deeper going on.
Right.
Something beyond just willpower and environmental triggers.
Absolutely. And this leads us to one of the most crucial and perhaps controversial aspects of the book. The idea that willpower and self-knowledge alone are not enough for true recovery. That's where the idea of a spiritual solution comes in, right? But the book doesn't endorse any specific religion, does it?
Not at all. It emphasizes that the power to resist that first drink.
Right.
To break free from that cycle of addiction. It needs to come from something outside of themselves. This higher power. It can be interpreted in many ways, depending on one's personal beliefs.
Exactly.
It could be a connection to nature, a sense of belonging in a community.
Right.
Or even a deep commitment to a cause greater than oneself.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is how this idea, which might seem rooted in a specific time and place, actually aligns with some of the key principles of modern therapy.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, take cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, for example.
Okay.
It emphasizes the importance of identifying and challenging negative thought patterns. Finding a higher power, in a sense, could be seen as finding a source of positive beliefs and values to counteract those negative thoughts.
So it's like replacing those self-destructive thought patterns with something stronger.
Right.
Something that gives you a sense of purpose and hope.
Exactly. And then there's the whole idea of community support, which is central to 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's also widely recognized as crucial in recovery by most modern approaches.
That sense of belonging, of not being alone in your struggle, can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the research on the importance of social connection for overall well-being.
Absolutely.
It's like having a network of people who understand what you're going through and can offer support and encouragement.
It's a reminder that we're not meant to go through life's challenges alone.
Yeah.
And this need for connection, as we discussed earlier, is deeply human.
So it seems like even though the language and approach might be different, there are some interesting points of convergence between the ideas presented in Alcoholics Anonymous and contemporary views on addiction. It's like they're coming at it from different angles, but arriving at some similar conclusions.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And one of the most powerful shared messages is that recovery often requires something beyond just individual willpower. It's about finding strength and support from sources outside of ourselves. Whether that's through therapy, community, spirituality, or a combination of all of those things.
It's about recognizing our own limitations. And seeking help when we need it. And that, I think, is a message that resonates far beyond the realm of addiction. It speaks to the human condition as a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this deep dive into Alcoholics Anonymous hasn't just given us a glimpse into the historical context of addiction. It's prompted us to reflect on the complexities of human struggle and the enduring need for support and connection in the face of adversity.
It's made me think about the power of stories. Of sharing our experiences with others. It's how we learn, it's how we grow, and how we find strength in the face of challenges.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together. And while this chapter has offered some profound insights, it definitely leaves us with more questions than answers.
It does, and I think that's a good thing. It encourages us to keep exploring, to dig deeper into the complexities of addiction and recovery, and to challenge our own assumptions about what it means to be human. It's about acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, but that the search itself is a valuable part of the journey.
That's beautifully said. I think that's a perfect lead-in to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some more contemporary perspectives on addiction and recovery. We'll examine how scientific understanding has evolved since Alcoholics Anonymous was published, and how that higher power concept might be interpreted in today's world.
Okay, so we've spent some time with this powerful chapter from Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's really, laid bare some of those core struggles of, the alcoholic mind. And the uphill battle of staying sober. But like we mentioned, this book was published back in 1939.
That's right, yeah. And while its central message about the need for a higher power to overcome the grip of alcohol continues to, resonate with people, it's crucial to acknowledge how much scientific understanding and treatment has evolved.
Yeah, for sure. It feels like we've just learned so much more about the brain and the mechanisms of addiction since then. Like, what stands out to you as some of the most significant advancements, since 1939?
Well, I think one of the biggest breakthroughs has been understanding the biological basis of addiction. Mm-hmm. We now know that it's a complex brain disease, one that directly affects the reward pathways and decision-making centers.
So it's not just a weakness of character or a lack of willpower, as some might have believed back then.
Right.
There are real physical changes occurring in the brain.
Exactly. And this understanding has opened up entirely new avenues for treatment.
Yeah.
For example, we now have medications that can help manage cravings and reduce the risk of relapse.
That's huge.
Which is, it's huge.
That's incredible. It seems like acknowledging that biological component, takes away some of the stigma surrounding addiction. It's not just a matter of pulling yourself together.
Right.
It's about, addressing a medical condition.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Recognizing addiction as a disease helps us approach it with more compassion and understanding. But what about that idea of a higher power that the book emphasizes? Where does that fit in with our modern understanding?
That's what I was curious about, too. It seems like a concept that might clash with the more scientific view of addiction,
Yeah, it's interesting because while the term higher power might sound outdated or even mystical to some, the underlying principles actually align with some key aspects of modern therapy.
Really? Tell me more about that. I'm intrigued.
Okay, well, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, emphasizes identifying and challenging negative thought patterns, which can be a major driver in addiction. So in a sense, finding a higher power could be seen as finding a source of positive beliefs and values to combat those destructive thoughts.
So instead of relying solely on your own willpower, which can be easily, depleted,
right.
You're tapping into something larger than yourself, like a set of beliefs or a community that can support you through those difficult moments.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like building a stronger foundation for your recovery, something that goes beyond your individual efforts.
Right.
And this connects to another key element of modern treatment.
Yeah.
Community support.
That's something Alcoholics Anonymous emphasizes as well, right?
Yes.
The power of the group.
Yes.
The shared experience of recovery.
Absolutely. While the book frames it in terms of finding strength through a higher power, the importance of community support is echoed in most contemporary approaches.
Yeah.
Whether it's group therapy, peer support groups, or even online communities, having that network of people who understand your struggles is invaluable.
Yeah. It reminds me of the research on the importance of social connection for overall well-being, just knowing you're not alone.
Yeah.
That others have walked this path and come out the other side, that can be incredibly powerful.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that sense of shared humanity, the realization that we're all in this together. And while the language might differ, it seems like both the traditional approach outlined in Alcoholics Anonymous and modern perspectives on addiction recognize this fundamental need for connection.
It's like they're approaching the problem from different angles.
Yeah.
but arriving at some similar conclusions.
I agree.
So even though our scientific understanding has like advanced significantly, the human element remains at the core of recovery.
I couldn't agree more. And it brings us back to that question we posed earlier. If willpower alone isn't enough, what other factors play a crucial role in recovery?
It sounds like community, a sense of purpose, access to, evidence-based treatment, and recognizing the biological components of addiction are all key pieces of the puzzle.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that these pieces can fit together in different ways for different people. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. What matters is finding what works for you.
Yeah.
What gives you the strength and support you need to navigate this challenging journey?
That's a great point. And what's so fascinating about this deep dive into Alcoholics Anonymous is that it's not just given us a historical perspective on addiction. It's prompted us to think about like the broader human experience, the universal struggles we all face.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all have our own battles to fight, our own challenges to overcome, and seeking support, connecting with others, and finding sources of strength outside ourselves can make all the difference.
I think that's a beautiful takeaway. So to our listeners, we encourage you to, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep seeking out diverse perspectives on the things that matter to you.
Remember, there's always more to learn, and the journey of discovery is never ending.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.